Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for checking out my channel, and thanks especially for checking out this video. We've got a real treat for all of you today, and I also have a real treat for myself, really. And that treat is the conversation that we're going to be. Whoop, there we go. And that treat is the conversation we're going to be having today. One of the things that I really like to stand for on this channel is a dialectical process. So, meaning that you let the discussion happen, you let the discussion play out, and you let the viewpoints clash. But what we're going to do today is a little bit different than that. What we're going to do is say, well, here's somebody from the other side, from a contrarian perspective, from some of the things that we see on this channel. And let's get to know them as a person, really. And let's get to know them as an ally, a content creator, and as a friend. I can't prove this, but I have heard it said that we are not just opponents in a debate and a discourse. We are also all individually people. So, with that in mind, oh, Adam, I forgot to ask, what should I say about you to introduce you? I'll let you introduce yourself, but let's see if we can prove that. And let's please give a very warm reception. If you're at home, I guess you can clap in if you'd like. But I'm really glad to have Adam here with me. And Adam from the channel Skepticus, really fantastic channel. Thanks so much for joining us. And here it is. And feel free to introduce yourself, Adam.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation. As you said, I have my own YouTube channel called Skepticus at skepticus.channel. And you and I guess, started at about the same time because I saw that you just had your 1-year anniversary as well. So I started this just slightly longer than a year ago, and I've been cranking out videos. I do live streams now every Tuesday night. I've just started doing that in the last couple months. But over the last year, I've done literally hundreds of videos, usually mid to long form, something like 45 minutes around in terms of length, where I try to dive into a whole host of issues, although they are mostly centered around religion. And I admit that I spend a lot of time talking about Christianity because it is the paradigm in which I was raised. I was a Christian for 40 years. But, I'm not limited to just talking about Christianity. I probably, for anyone who watches my content, I'm certain that at times I may feel a little adversarial because I at this point in my life, I think, enjoy pointing out some of the holes that I perceive to be in Christianity. But compared to other YouTube debaters, I guess, I don't think that I am as acerbic as some. I'd like to think that I'm a little more well-balanced, but I'm certainly coming at things from a skeptic / atheist or agnostic or non-believer kind of viewpoint.
Yeah, and I mean, from my point, whenever we've interacted, and I think I would say this in general, I've been watching your channel for a while. I feel like you do a pretty good job of letting people make their case, say their piece, and just express themselves in general. And you do it with a degree of dignity that I think is really wonderful. And we're going to get into that. But that's your introduction. What would you like me to say for my introduction? How familiar are you with my background? And I guess I can say a quick blurb about myself for the audience. If people are tuning in to see you and they don't know who I am, I'm happy to give a quick blurb.
Yeah, that's a great point. Feel free to, of course, it's your stream, but I mean, feel free to share anything about yourself. I will freely admit that I hadn't seen much of your channel until a few weeks ago, and I said, oh, I should check out some of his content, of course. And I'm not going to claim to have watched all of your videos, but I have watched several of them, including your your most recent CTF video. I was listening in for a while, as long as I could on your anniversary live stream. But yeah, by all means, I wouldn't be able to give you a full intro, so let everyone know who you are.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief, but for those of you who don't know, I'm a physician and I'm a professor, and my contribution is to try to tackle issues from a lens that's academically informed. So in other words, I try to use, I'm also an editor for 2 scholarly journals in my field. I'm one of the most prolific reviewers of manuscripts for the top journal in my field. I'm not saying that to brag, I'm just saying I'm kind of always in that mindset of trying to be academic, trying to be evidence-based, In theology, that's sometimes hard to do. So people have probably varying opinions about how. Good comment from Nero Turtle. Quit stroking yourself slash each other and talk. We will get into and by the way, this is going to be more of a discussion. This is more of us. And if you wanted to do this again, Adam, I'm happy to have more of a debate. But this discussion is just going to be really a discussion. So if people are tuning in to expect like a bloodbath or a clashing of viewpoints, I really just want to ask you some questions, which I've sent to you in advance, and I just want to kind of get to know you. But anyways, that's a little bit about me. I'm also a lifelong atheist. I was an atheist up until about 2 years ago or so. Maybe 2.5, 3 years ago, I became agnostic. And about 2 years ago, I essentially stopped being an atheist. But I'm still sort of theologically non-committed. All right, so walk me through. I think we know your viewpoints. Your videos are very persuasive. They're very cogent. But walk me through your personal journey. Did you have a religion when you were raised? What was that religion? What and when did it sort of fade away? And why did you leave it? And what are some of those details? I'd love to know more about the narrative details.
Sure. I mean, I'll tell you as much as you want to know, although I'll also try to not go on for too long because, I've seen from those who are atheists and agnostics, all of the nuns category online. Some people have some fascinating and spectacular stories of deconstruction, and I mean that in a way that sometimes they are excruciating to listen to, but they can be incredibly engrossing. And I don't feel like I am that way. I mean, I did deconstruct. I was a Christian for 40 years, but I don't have some high drama story to tell you about, this uh, incredible moment when I realized that everything fell away. My story is perhaps a little more mundane. That I was raised by, in a Protestant household, although my father's whole side of the family was Catholic, so I certainly had a lot of influence from Catholicism as well. My parents, I love them; they're still with us, and they are still, devout Christians. But I was raised in what I would like to call a Northern Protestant aesthetic, meaning we were religious. I was taught to pray, and you had to give your life to Jesus, and we went to church and all that. But compared to what I see as often like more of a Southern fundamentalist evangelical fervor, we certainly were not that kind of family. And I had officially, I was raised in the church, but I had officially like given my life to Christ when I was 15, and I was a pretty strong believer for a large part of my life. But it wasn't until I was about 40. I don't have an actual date to give you, but it wasn't until at some point when I was 40 I realized like I just don't believe this anymore. And it wasn't. I did a video where I kind of gave this buffet selection of all these weird little things that happened through my life that all certainly undermined my faith, but none of them are. You can look at every one of those stories and say that can't be what made you an atheist, Adam, and you would be right. None of those individual stories made me an atheist. The best synopsis I can give you for it is that it really came down to Occam's razor, which is that as someone who has always been a huge fan of critical thinking, a huge fan of science, a huge fan, even as a Christian, of empiricism, for most of my life, I had been building all of these structures around my Christianity. I had been, I had this whole, and it just got more and more complex as I got older, this whole complex structure that I used to try to, the scaffolding I put around Christianity and the scaffolding I put around the Bible, and these rhetorical, gymnastics, these structures that I had to build in order to synthesize what didn't make sense to me if I just took things at face value. And finally, by the time I was 40, I just realized, as Occam's razor would dictate, like you can look at this incredibly detailed Rube Goldberg kind of machine that you built to try to justify all of your beliefs and try to still convince yourself that you believe, or you could just say, you know what, there's a much more obvious, much simpler answer to all of this, which is that it just isn't there. And despite what I do on my channel, I don't ever try to tell other people directly that, hey, your God is fake. I mean, sometimes like if I talk to someone, live who's kind of being a jerk or something, I might just, sometimes you might just have more of a pointed conversation. But I'm not here to take away anyone's faith, even if I could, even if I had that ability. But for me, I just can't. I've not only I didn't just become like an agnostic. I'm certainly I truly am a hard atheist or a strong atheist now. I contend that there is no God, and I know that's a lot of atheists aren't even comfortable making that statement, but I am.
No, that's super helpful. And by the way, what I'm doing as you're chatting is I'm showing some of the comments just to give a highlight to some of the great. There's actually a few great channels like TNC Apologetics did a really great video today. I'm going to check that out after this conversation. So everyone check out his channel. And if you're putting questions in the comments, we're going to go through those as well. So I'm going to try and get to everyone's questions. We're going to go through like kind of a list of questions that I think will be kind of good and informative and things we've talked about in advance. But if anyone wants to put questions in the chat, you can ask your questions of myself or Skepticus. Let us know if it's one that you think might be hard to figure out where they're being directed. And by the way, if you're tuning in, there's at least a few people in the chat now, and I'm really grateful for that. And some of you are people that I don't know yet. So feel free to like click the like button on this video. That really does help us out. I'm a much smaller channel. And please feel free to subscribe to my channel. All right, so Adam, next question. Let's say I am 35-year-old Adam, okay? And you knock on my door, and I'm like, wow, it's me from however a short time in the future. I don't know how old you are, but and you say, you know what, I came here to save you some time. I'm going to advance the clock on you 5 years. Here's my reason why you should. What is your elevator pitch? What are your central arguments? What do you think is the most convincing pitch? I like the Occam's razor, but like, what is this? What are the sort of show us what that razor looks like? And help me, the 35-year-old Adam, get to where you are a little bit more quickly.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'll just tell you from a philosophical perspective, and I like to kind of play amateur philosopher sometimes, but that term Philbro has a definite negative connotation to it for good reason. So, and I don't have a philosophy pedigree like in college or anything like that, but from a philosophical perspective, not just with Occam's razor, but I'm a big fan of certain thought experiments like Russell's teapot, which is that you can. It's one thing to say, oh, anything could be out there. Even if we say, I know a lot of people go from being faithful to being agnostic because they just want to say in fact, a lot of people will tell you that it's the most intellectually honest position to take because every God proposition that I've ever heard is unfalsifiable. So if it's unfalsifiable, and if you know that it's unfalsifiable, then it isn't intellectually the most honest to say, well, then I don't know because I can't prove your God isn't there, and you can't prove he's there. But that being said, to me, the flaw in that logic when we're talking about something as fantastical as the God proposition is to point out that, it's one thing to say that I don't know if there's a house 2 streets over. Maybe I haven't been 2 streets over, so I can be agnostic about that, right? Because there's a good chance there is a house there. And if there's not, that's fine too. But if we're talking about the God proposition, this is not a mundane claim. This is something that is truly at the extreme, the last edge of fantastical. So for those types of claims, I think that it is more than reasonable to logically discount them, to say, just like Russell's teapot. I mean, the idea that Russell's teapot is out there is not technically falsifiable, even with the most sensitive instruments that we have, and yet there is no logical reason to accept that the truth is that Russell's teapot is actually out there. So that's something that I would say to my younger self a little bit, because I think for a while you kind of hold on to this. You're trying to be intellectually honest, and you're trying to be fair, and you're trying to say, well, I can't disprove that God's there, so I guess I should just admit that I don't know. And for many things in life, that's a fair and honest way to look at it. But from a perspective of, extraordinary claims requires extraordinary evidence. Well, when we're talking about something as extraordinary as the omnipotent creator God of the universe, I'm comfortable now saying that he's not there. But on a more practical level, I did not become atheist because of people around me. I did not become atheist because of politics. But I think, and I'm going to try to say this carefully, because I know a lot of times people like kind of groan and roll their eyes and like, oh, politics. And I'm not going to try to go on a diatribe here about anything. But if I could go to 35-year-old Adam, and if I could show him the headlines from this country over the last 10 years, and show him video from this country over the last 10 years, and show him the overt banner waving that people who claim to be Christian do in the name of some of the most disgusting causes that I've ever seen in this country, that would not make me atheist, because in theory, it's either true or it's not, right? Like if God's there and if Jesus died for your sins, then it doesn't, in theory, it shouldn't matter if every single follower of his is a complete douchebag, right? That in theory. But there's also another way to look at this, which is that, if I go to a golf club every week and I'm enjoying golfing and I'm thinking, hey, it's a nice golf club, it shouldn't matter to me what the other people are like here, as long as I'm enjoying the game, as long as I'm enjoying sitting at the 19th hole and having a beer. And there are probably other people in that golf club that are jerks. But when you find out that, man, everyone I meet at this golf club is a jerk, you start to go, I don't know about this. And then when you start to realize that a lot of them are racist or bigots or misogynists, and then you start thinking, man, do I really want to be a member of that golf club? Even if I can, plug my ears and close my eyes and say, look, it's just a nice way to spend a Sunday afternoon playing a round of golf. I'm not associated specifically with these people, but at some point you kind of are, and so I guess that is, for me, if I went back and talked to 30 or 35-year-old Adam, not because this should make you atheist or agnostic, but I would show him the club. I would show him the members of the club. And I wouldn't even I don't think you have to lead him there. I think I would just say, is this the club that you want to be in?
Yeah, well, I mean, that is a persuasive argument, and we don't get too political on this channel either, but I appreciate that it's a hard line to walk, and I appreciate that we are living through a time where our politics have become a little bit imbued with our theology, even though there's not necessarily an inherent reason why that has to be. All right, so I'm going to ask a question that's a slight deviation from what we have on the list, but I think it's a good one based on something that you said just a moment ago.
Sure.
There's a lot of people making YouTube content. There's a lot of people making content on other platforms. What if you had to say, here's why because there's a lot of atheists out there, there's a lot of apologists. What is the perspective that you think you bring to the discussion? And if you want to answer that question after this next one and give it some thought, I'm happy to do that, because I have a next question keyed up for you as well. So. And the next one after that would be just, you've really made a huge amount of volume. So let's come back to that question. But my other question is, you've made, like, in a very short time, hundreds and hundreds of videos. What's the key to generating so much content? How do you do it? What's your typical workflow? And how do you stay motivated to generate a really, really prolific amount of content, especially for being, like you said, a fairly young channel?
So first of all, in a mission there, that since I started the channel over the last year, twice within the span of just a year, I have been unemployed, which doesn't sound very flattering to me. But obviously, there's
it's hard. It's a hard job market out there. Yeah, I'm lucky, but it's a hard job market.
There's stories around that would have nothing to do with the content of our channels that would bore people. And but let's just say that I have a really good job now, and I'm really enjoying it, and I'm hoping that it will be a very long-term job. But the point is that for 2 times in the last year alone, I had several months where I had a lot of free time on my hands. So I've kind of, in some respect, cheated the system. I don't know if I'm a year from now, I don't know if I'm going to have double the amount of content that I have at this point. So that's a disclaimer there. But that kind of dances around your question a little bit too. Regardless of whatever the time constraints are for me in a typical week, and I can crank out a lot of content even doing a full-time job, because I get content together and I can record 2, 3, 4 different episodes in one session. Now there's still editing, and editing is always the kind of the, it's like the base of the iceberg, right? It's one thing to record content. It's another thing to get everything looking well.
Oh,
and,
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. And I try to strike a balance, because I'm not a big channel, and I could do better editing if I wanted to spend 3 or 4 more hours on every video doing it. But at a certain point, you're like, okay, do I want to put out one video every 2 weeks, or do I want to get these ideas out? And right now, so far, I have leaned towards getting the ideas out. But that being said, in terms of getting away from just the time question of, do you have enough time to do it? Part of the reason that I'm doing this is, I'd wanted to start a YouTube channel for a couple of years, and I toyed around with different ideas. And a little more than a year ago, of course, I started thinking about the religion thing and the atheist thing. And there was just so much stuff topically that's going on in the world that made me really feel motivated to want to talk about this. But I was very consciously aware of the fact that, there are a lot of subjects that I think everyone has subjects that they are passionate about. And everyone, if they were so inclined, could create a YouTube channel about whatever their passion is. But there are some things that you might be passionate about that don't lend themselves to tons and tons of content. All right. Like if you want to do a cooking show, you could do that for 50 years and never do the same recipe twice. If you wanted to do a show about, if you only wanted to do a show about making muffins, granted, there are many different muffins in the world, but I think at some point it would start to feel a little old, like, damn, we're doing the same muffin again, So I played around with different subjects in my head, like, what do I want to talk about? And when I had a subject in my head, do I have enough there to not just do a couple great videos, or even to do, in the YouTube world, even if you did 50 great videos, I mean, if then you're out of inspiration on that topic, where do you go from there?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
the first thing I thought, I was thinking I wanted to do religion, but I was worried about, do I have enough subjects? And I thought, well, the first idea I had was maybe I could just do a series going through the Bible. And the first series of mine that I started was God-Free Bible Study. And I thought, but I don't want to get on my channel and just read people the Bible, just line by line. There has to be something that I can add to it or bring to the table. And even then I wondered, well, is there enough content in the Bible for me to really provide commentary on? And then I sat there one night, my wife was at work, and I started going just through Genesis. And I've read the Bible 3 full times before doing this, cover to back. But I hadn't picked up the Bible in probably 12 years. And the last time I read it was as a believer. So I started going through Genesis alone, and I thought, oh my gosh, there's so much stuff here. There's so many things that I never saw. It's like that scene in They Live where he puts on the glasses, and it's probably a dated reference for some of your viewers, but the classic movie.
No, They Live. Great movie. Yeah. Yeah. I love any Keith David movie. I'm big fan of Keith David for some reason.
Things are everywhere. And then, I start going through the Bible, and of course, even at this point, of course, I haven't gone all the way through the Bible, but just in 1 or 2 chapters alone, there's so much stuff to comment on. And then getting away from the Bible stuff, the more I just started thinking about all of the logical or illogical precepts of religion in general and Christianity in particular, it's like the more I looked, the more I saw. And at this point, I've got a list of topics that I haven't been able to get to that's longer than my arm. Some of them I'll get to. Some of them still just kind of keep hanging out there because new ideas come into my head that I want to do first. So long story short, I know it's too late, but long story short is, I felt I haven't had any dearth of ideas at all. If anything, I have too many ideas for me to even be able to cover.
Yeah, well, that's helpful. Well, if you're just joining us, just a reminder to everyone who's listening, we're here to chew gum and have a really nice conversation, and we're all out of gum, so we're we're having a great conversation. But this is not meant to be really adversarial or anything. But I would love, we've got people on all sides of the theological spectrum in the chat, so feel free to ask your questions, and we'll post them up as we go further on in the conversation. And by the way, if you haven't done it already, please click the like button on this video. Please subscribe to my channel if you would. That really does help us out. And also, please subscribe to Skepticus. It's a really fantastic channel. I think for those of you who are tuning in because you're on the more Christian side of the theological spectrum, I think one of the things that we don't do enough of is really listen to each other intently and with really, really good engagement. So I would encourage you. I think if you're looking for a channel to engage with, I think Skepticus is a really great way to have conversations with people who are on the other side of the theological spectrum, but are still going to be receiving your viewpoints with kindness. All right. Well, like I said, you interact with a lot of folks, and and there's a reminder from TNC Apologetics: like and subscribe, always a good idea. A lot of great folks. Comment for you. He seems very nice. I'm pretty sure that's for you. And Slave of Adonai Elijah, thanks very much for tuning in. Also, great channel. All right. So let's get to the next question. So you engage a lot with people who oh, and Dr. Kurt says he just started a Substack on my purposefulness video. That's great. Dr. Kurt, if you haven't checked out his Substack, it's substack.com/ekurtallen, and he's responded to a lot of my CTF arguments. There's a lot of great folks in the chat, so I hope we'll have some conversations that are also nuclei for really interesting directions for us to keep chatting. All right, but I've got a lot more questions. But now you've engaged with a lot of people who are on the theological side of the spectrum. What's like a surprising engagement that you've had? What's a surprising conversation? Have you changed someone's mind, or have you just thought of something as insightful? Or if you have any conversation that you've had with people on the other side of the spectrum that you think have been illuminating, interesting, fascinating, or really proved a really important point, I'd love to hear about that. And just to answer one quick question from a really great channel, TNC Apologetics, definitely check out his channel. When should we ask questions? You can put them in the chat. I'll probably intermix them with some of the questions that I've been going through. First question is, who dis guy? This is Adam from the channel Skepticus, really fantastic channel. Michael Cole, why he's not a Christian anymore? I think we've kind of covered that, but we did cover it early on. It was when you were talking about sort of clubs and stuff, and on that line, you have a really fantastic community on your channel. I won't embarrass anyone, but one of the people who's on your channel who's a frequent contributor is like a member of a band that I really used to idolize from a very young age. So that if that's the only thing that comes out of this conversation, that alone was like made me feel really cool. All right.
I don't even know who you're referring to, but that's interesting.
Yeah, there's somebody on your channel who's a member of a band that was like the coolest to me when I was a kid.
Okay.
I mean, and they're still pretty cool, I'm sure. Yeah, I don't mean to like.
This is like
I'm just not cool anymore. So
to me or something, because I'm curious as to like what band we're talking about.
I think I don't want to embarrass that person, but if they want to put it in the comment, I'll show the comment. But
right, yeah. Well, I guess my point was if you would share it with me privately, but if you don't want to do that either, I understand it too. I respect that, but that's really cool. But you were asking about the engagements I've had with people on the other side, like from a Christian or believer's perspective.
Yeah.
So I don't have a really great answer for this, although maybe the explanation of why I don't is the answer. So I really wish I could tell you about this great conversation or great conversations that I had live on live streams or or via email or whatever with believers. And for the most part, that really hasn't happened. Let me tell you, every channel I'm sure is a little different. This has been the flow of kind of information I've gotten from my channel. Probably, of course, you don't know what people's beliefs are just because they watch your video or drop a comment. But usually from the comments, you can kind of tell they're either like, on your side, or they're totally against you, or they're somewhere in the middle kind of thing. I would say that somewhere between 90 and 95% of all the people that engage with my content are absolutely, on board, so to speak, with my viewpoint, which, would I love to have more people on the other side of the fence? Sure, I would. But that doesn't surprise me either, because before I started doing this channel, now I spend a lot of time watching apologetics, but because it's kind of, I hate to say it this way because it sounds adversarial, but it's like enemy research. It's like, you're seeing what the other side is saying. But before I started doing this channel, did I watch apologetics content? No. I found most of it to be ridiculous. Not all of it, but most of it. And if anything, I found a lot of it to be a waste of my time. So it doesn't shock me that on my channel, even though I'd like to think that I'm not completely acerbic, I still am adversarial enough that there's not usually a large Christian or believer contingent that's, maybe they're watching, but they're not doing a lot of commenting. So 90 or 95% of the people who comment or chat during the live streams are definitely agnostic or, skeptic on some level. The ones who do engage, the vast majority of them are, not really bringing anything to the table. And I'm not saying this is some, insult towards Christianity. I'm just saying towards the people who engage with my stuff. They're blanket proselytizing. People will just get in the comments and put their Jesus quotes or whatever. Usually it has nothing to do with the video, other than the fact that it's a skeptical video and they're like, here's my preachy moment. Or, they're just outright insulting. Like, they're not even trying to engage. Like, even when people put longer counter comments on my stuff, usually one of the key things that I've seen time and time again is that I can do an hour-long video. And maybe it's not the best video in the world. Maybe my points were not the most cogent points, okay? If that's the case, then make your case. Tell me. But after I do an hour-long video, which of course implies, multiple hours of work on my part to make my case, then somebody puts a comment, or, sometimes it's a long comment, but they couldn't even be bothered to engage with a single point in the video. They're just kind of just spewing. And, sometimes I can tell that they haven't even watched the video. They've just seen the thumbnail and the title, and they didn't like it. So they thought they were going to throw some zingers. Sometimes you can tell that they watched some of the video and they didn't seem to listen much. And I don't mean, when I say listen, I don't mean, it's fine if you disagree with me. Tell me what's wrong in my argument, but it's very, very rare that I've gotten anyone from a believer's perspective who has provided anything on the channel that has felt meaningful. Now, some of the callers that I've had on the live streams, and I've only started live streaming a few months ago, some of the callers we've had good conversation, thoughtful conversation, but no one that made me go, man, that's a great point, because it just seems like so many times the points that are brought up are these kind of canned apologetic talking points. Things like, oh, well, you think everything came from nothing. It's like, oh my gosh, is that the best you've got? And you're going to go down this road now. You're going to throw out this straw man that I think everything came from nothing. And, then you're going to cross your arms and puff out your chest like you've done something. So that's a long way of saying I haven't had the kind of great interplay that you might like if you want to have intellectual dialogue. The one thing I will say that has been stunning to me since I started the channel, I've known Christians my whole life. My family's Christian. Most of my friends are Christian. I know how Christians interact, like on videos and such, but I didn't know until I started this channel the extent to which at least some Christians will adamantly and blindly defend some of the most horrific aspects of their faith. I don't mean like they'll say, like it'd be one thing if you said, "Oh, that's the Old Testament," and that's I don't go by the Old Testament. I mean, I think there's big problems with the argument, but I get it. Like I did the same thing when I was a Christian. But I mean the people who will tell you to your face that the book of Job is a beautiful book. And I just don't understand that. And I know that some people, atheists and Christians, think it's somehow they think it's a great book. I think it's one of the most embarrassing aspects of the entire religion myself. And it's not because it's just, well, it is my opinion, but I can sit there and go through the text and just show you how I think that part of it is just morally bankrupt. And I'm not trying to devolve into a discussion on Job, but I'm just bringing that.
No, I mean, and you may not know this. I'm actually named after Job.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, but I'll admit that's like a really unfortunate person to name your child after. That's so. I mean, I don't know how I feel about that. We do have a question. I have an irrelevant question because this comes from Slave of Adonai Elijah. Really fantastic channel, really interesting person. I hope that you guys will interact at some point. I have an irrelevant question. Who is your favorite prophet? And there are some other questions, so we can do those afterwards too. But first, before we get to this question, I do want to really resonate with what you said because I'll resonate with it afterwards, but remind me to backtrack to this point. Yeah. So anyways, who's your favorite prophet?
So I assume we're talking from a Christian tradition. I mean,
you know what? I'm willing to broaden it. Like, so if there's something, I have a question later coming up, which is, what religion would you be if you could be any religion? But yeah, let's consider through the Christian canonical works, or you can pick from like Jewish canonical works, or you can pick from all religious works. However you want to answer the question. I'd be curious for at least both options.
Yeah, it's really hard for me to say favorite prophet. In terms of the one that I find to be the most interesting, I guess is probably the most stock answer, which is Isaiah, just because there is so much in Isaiah that is twisted beyond all recognition, and therefore I find the reading of it and the reading of the suffering servant, for example, and despite what some people think, it's not just Isaiah 53. That's not the only place that the suffering servant lives. But what's happening there throughout Isaiah, I find to be rather interesting. I find the second half of Daniel to be kind of interesting as well. But that's not because of the prose. It's not because of the predictions per se. It's because when you understand how it was written and you understand that, like, the first half of it is like incredibly accurate. Like, wow, what a great prophet. And the second half of it, none of that happened. And then you realize why that happened, because it was written. The point it was, the first half of it, they were writing the prophecies after everything had happened. And the second half of it, it just all fell apart because they were trying to actually be a prophet. But that's probably sounding like a snarky response to that. But, from a prose perspective, I mean, the prophets to me are some of the more challenging to read. I don't necessarily, that's why I say Isaiah to me is interesting, just because of all of the stuff that gets hung onto it. But in terms of like, which prophet do I like to sit down and read? I mean, there are far better books that aren't, because like Ecclesiastes is not the prophet, but that's a beautiful book.
That's probably my favorite book is Ecclesiastes.
Yeah. And it's not prophecy at all, but it's wisdom literature. That's what it is. And some of Proverbs is beautiful. Some of Proverbs is gross, but some of Proverbs, and there are other books that I like much more than others as well. But in terms of the prophets, like I'm even trying to think, like I'm sitting here going through them in my head, like,
Well, I mean, but I think you've raised an important point. There's at least some fascinatingly beautiful literature in there, right? I think Ecclesiastes is a wonderful book from I read that as an atheist, and I thought this is pretty good, and like people should read this as literature.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
What about? Oh, go ahead. Yeah. What about what religion you would pick? So let's say I said you have to choose a religion, and I'm gonna push this button. I can push a bunch of buttons, and one button for each religion. Which would you choose? And and why. There's a question from Slave of Adonai Elijah. How relevant do these questions have to be? I can ask some dumb ones if you wish. I don't think there's any dumb questions. I mean, I think we're having a nice chat. I have a bunch more questions, and there's some really intelligent people in the chat. So I would love it for you all to ask whatever you'd like. Remember, the goal here is to just really have a nice conversation. So we're not, I mean, we're not really trying to, this is just kind of a get to know each other thing. So, and I think there's a real role for that. And I think it does get lost. So, but yeah, you can ask any questions. They can be dumb ones. We will, if we feel like, and Adam, like, don't feel like, by the way, if you're just joining us, Adam from Skepticus, really fantastic channel, really incredible thinker, really powerful, cogent arguments, really great video content. So check out his channel, skepticus.channel. And my channel as well. Click the like button, go subscribe to my channel if you'd like. But yeah, so, and Adam, if you want, you always get a you can always claim a mulligan, or you can always say, let me think about that once more, and that's totally fine. So if you get one that's like dumb or hard and you don't want to say, well, that's dumb, you can ask anything. And thanks very much, Michael Cole, for saying it's a great live stream. I appreciate that. All right, we got another question from well, let's ask the question that we have, and then we'll go to this question from 21st Century Apologetics, and then we'll go to Slave of Adonai for his question as well. And hopefully you're seeing the questions in the chat too, Adam, so you can also think about them while we're chatting. But I think, yeah, so I think we're talking about what religion, which theology, if you had to pick one, which do you think is, and for whatever reason, it could be the most unimpugnable, or it could be the one with the best community, or whatever you'd like to talk about.
Sure. I'll give you two answers to that. I mean, I've said.
Oh, and sorry to interrupt again, but we do have a question that sort of dovetails off that. Can you describe the traits, like personality-wise, of what you would consider a good God? That may be a little bit tied to this question. So if you want to tackle that at the same time, or we can circle back to that.
Yeah. That's a great question. I do think it kind of dovetails into this. So I'll give you two answers here in terms of, like, I've said on my channel before, if you put a gun to my head and this is Adam, you have to just pick a God or a model of God, or excuse me, that you just have to, even if you don't personally believe it, it's to save yourself. You have to pick whatever you can most defend. The first thing that I would say is kind of a cheating non-answer is deism, which isn't a religion, and it's, some people would argue it's not even. I mean, deism is, you can be a deist and believe that the God is there, right? But I think a lot of theists would feel like that's kind of a weaseling answer. But that's the first thing that I would say, is because before I finally realized, like, no, I think I really am a hard atheist. Like, I'm a strong atheist. I just don't think anything's there. Part of the reason that I don't think anything is there is because when we look at the universe, the entire universe, from the quantum realm all the way up to the macro level, everything that I'm aware of seems to be consistent with what we would expect there to be if either there was no God, or if that God simply had checked out, just wasn't involved. And I feel like I have something of a closer association with this, because my day job is that I'm a computer programmer. And one of the things that I haven't done it in a while, but I used to, like when I was younger especially, love to build simulations. I was fascinated by building simulations. But even if you haven't built a simulation, we've all probably, most of us have played a simulation at some time. You played SimCity or Sims or something like that. And just because you build something, just because you build a system, just because the system works and runs and keeps chugging along, doesn't mean that you actively care about the individual Sims. It doesn't mean that you love them. It doesn't mean that you're working the strings and trying to make sure that Joe gets the parking spot that he wanted, and that Mary gets the good weather for her picnic. I mean, it is perfectly feasible, if we want to think about models of God, to think that maybe there is the big creator, deity of the universe, and he made the universe 15 billion years ago or whatever, and now he's got it on autopilot, or he's watching a planet somewhere in another galaxy because he's most interested in that right now. I mean, to me, everything that I see about our world, our universe, our humanity, all of it feels like if there is a God, the God is not personally involved. But like I said, that may feel like a bit of a cop out answer because I think people are like, but no, that's not really religion. There's not a deistic church you go to, and there's no holy books for deism, etc. So if I
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, I think we're living in a time of a lot of theological fractionation. And, when I talk to Christians at the church that I go to, I'll often encounter different responses if I ask similar questions. There's certainly some questions that they all sort of would agree with, but I think people are highly. Do you ever read Max Tegmark? Do you like his stuff? Do you know who that is?
I'm not familiar with them, no.
He's a mathematician who sort of likened the universe to. He says that mathematics is fundamental to the universe, and the universe is really more emergent and starts with mathematics as a language. All right. Well, there's another question. Have you done any? Oh, go ahead.
I do want to get to the other question, but I wanted to kind of finish.
Oh, sure. I think we're on this one, right?
The other half of that one, which is that if I had to pick something that wasn't just the non-involved, deistic thing, I don't think that there is a theistic religion that, even with a gun to my head, I could tell you with a straight face that I believe in. But the religion that clearly has the most value in my mind in terms of bringing value to the, in terms of worldview and philosophy is hands down Buddhism, which is also, non-theistic idea. But I spent some time when I was younger, kind of diving into Buddhism. I'm not going to say I was, truly knowledgeable about it, but the ideas of Buddhism are, to me, far more appealing and feel more intuitive than anything that I can tell you that I've gotten from not just Christianity, but from what little I know of Islam, from what I know of Judaism, from what I know of other polytheistic traditions. Like, I can't tell you another tradition that feels as nothing more than Buddhism feels more like it could actually help me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's some very beautiful tenets in the Pali Canon. I've read a lot of treatises on Buddhism. The Pali Canon is so exhaustive that I think there's very few people who have read all of it. But let's go back to this question, and then we'll get to some of the other questions. Have you done any videos on the CTF? I know the answer to that is no, but have you seen the video? If you have, what do you think of it?
So I was wondering if we're going to bring that up. So I've certainly
and it's not a prepared question, so you can also be like, "I've not checked out your content. I'm just here."
No,
to
that's fine. I have, and it might even lead to some other fun conversations. So I watched your stuff on CTF. I want to be careful how I say this because.
Oh, you're not going to offend me. I mean, I've heard it from all sides, so yeah.
Well, there are. When I was watching, because you did an earlier video, and then you did the most recent video, and then I've heard you also refer to it in other stuff as well. And there are usually, when I hear you talking about it, there are pieces that I'm like, I don't agree with that fact. I don't feel like that particular, and I could be wrong because I think you put a ton of effort into this. But to be clear, my bigger issue with it isn't about picking apart this fact or that fact or this attestation. Personally, while I can respect what it seems that you have done with CTF, when I was a Christian and even now as an atheist, for the way that I view religion, I personally feel like it misses the point. But when I say misses the point, I don't mean that it misses the point for everyone. It might totally make the point for you or someone else, but when I say that I feel it misses the point, I think that there's value in looking at this kind of cross-theological, framework and seeing like who has historical evidence and such. But when I was a Christian, and even now, I don't really care that much about evidence, about, like, first of all, I'm not a mythicist. I believe that Jesus walked the earth. I don't believe that he, rose from the dead, but I believe he was a real person. So in terms of, I'm not, and I know that your CTF framework is about more than addressing mythicism, but I just want to get that out there first of all. So like,
I mean, that's nice. I'm glad. I find I love talking to mythicists. I did like a 2-hour debate with one of the mythicists who's very popular, but I find it kind of an exasperating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I do
Present
too.
company excluded, by the way. There's some mythicists in the chat who I really love, and I'm not referring to any of you when I say that, but yeah.
But for me personally, here's what I would say about any discussion that starts, well, any discussion that goes down the path of looking at, and to be clear, even on my channel, sometimes I talk about what evidence there is or is not for things, because sometimes you just, if you talk about religion and if you talk about Christianity enough, of course you're going to talk about these things at some point. But here's the deeper point that I would make just for myself. If you told me that there's two new religions you haven't heard of, one we're going to call Pax, and one we're going to call Malice. Okay, you've never heard of these religions, and someone's trying to tell you why you need to follow Pax or you need to follow Malice, right?
This is a great thought experiment.
Pax has a holy book, and you start looking through the holy book, and Pax is beautiful. I mean, it's got wisdom, knowledge. It's got beautiful stories. It's got, stuff that you relate to, stuff that you feel, not only is it beautiful, but you think this could help me in my life going forward. It changes the way you look at the world. You think this is so deep, this is so meaningful. Malice also has a holy book, and it's disgusting. That's the God figure has just disgusting morals that change all the time, and he's vindictive, and he's, and even the stuff from the book that purports to be wisdom literature is at times questionable and makes you cringe. And both this Pax religion and the Malice religion both claim to have, things, verifiable things that happened on Earth, right? Like a God figure that came down and events that happened on Earth. But here's the deal. Pax has been attested through entire history by maybe one minor scholar who wrote a few things a few thousand years ago, and we're not even sure if that scholar was a real person. In other words, it's really crappily attested. Malice has been attested by thousands of people. We have records. We have, secular people who said, oh yeah, we saw this thing happen. So then the conclusion of my thought experiment is to say, okay, with those two hypothetical religions, is the greatly attested aspect of Malice meaningful to you at all, other than being an academic fact? But aside from that, does it make you want to believe more in Malice? Does it make you think that Malice is more true, or that it's something you should follow? Because for me personally, I'd say I don't know what we can say. I can get a little coarse sometimes. I don't freaking care.
I try not to use profanity on the channel because I don't know what the YouTube authorities. Yeah, I don't know.
That's fair. Yeah. I will control myself, but I don't have a horrible mouth, but sometimes I get off on tangents. But I don't freaking care. You know what I mean? Like I don't care if the entire nation of Russia in 1950 all saw Malice come to Earth and prove that he existed. But if he's a disgusting excuse for God, then I don't want to follow that. That's, even if it's real, I don't want to follow it. I would rather follow, like I talked about Buddhism. I mean, I don't know if Siddhartha, I believe on some level he was a historical person, but to what extent he was real, I don't know. And I don't really care. When I think about Buddhism and when I look into what Buddhism teaches, it doesn't matter if you could prove to me that nothing, that the Buddha himself never existed and was never there. To me, what's more important is it philosophically true and meaningful to me?
Yeah, I mean, I've enjoyed this conversation, but I know we're going to disagree on stuff, and now it's time to get to those points where the relationships are fractured, and we get into argument and we butt heads, and that's going to be right now. Pineapple on pizza. Which one? Where do you sit, Adam? This is going to be it.
I love pineapple on pizza. I think it's great.
Okay. All right, good, because that means that it's you and me against the audience on this issue.
Okay.
And as a Canadian, I got to have the Canadian bacon, and pineapple is the adjunct to that, as is well reputed in the historical and academic historiographic literature on this particular topic.
Exactly.
All right. Well, okay. So phew, we survived that. There's some great questions in the chat. So let me try and go back over some of these, and let me see. There's quite a few in here now, and I Let me go to this one because I think this is a good one. There's some profanity in the chat too. I'm going to skip over the profanity, and I also don't want to like make this about like here's a gotcha moment for anyone. But what would you do if you had dreams about God telling you to do something? How would you handle that? I think that's a really great question, Slave Bud and I.
If you had 20 consecutive dreams being the same with God telling you that you're a prophet, what would you do? I mean,
and here's another way to ask this question. Is there a personal, subjective, evidentiary threshold where you would say, yeah, I'm being summoned in some theological sense? I think that's a very hard question to answer because you never know if it's just like if I heard God's voice and God came to me personally and said, you got to punch some person in the face, I'd be like, okay, I'm hallucinating. Time for an MRI. But let's imagine that for this question, let's imagine that you've done the MRI, you've seen your neurologist, they can't find any evidence of psychopathology, and you're tackling this question. How many dreams would it take is another way of asking the question. How much subjective experience would need to mount for you to say like, okay, this is moving me to do something?
Well, while trying to maintain humility here and knowing that, like you said, you can't ever know if you were to have this neurological experience, especially if it's not one time, but if it happened repeatedly, it's, borderline arrogant to just say, this is what I would do, right? Because you don't know. You don't know what you would do. But what I believe I would do is it would cause me to question a lot of things, but I don't believe it would cause me to question whether this really was God commanding me to do something or telling me that I'm a prophet. It would definitely probably lead me to do more dream analysis, to do more psychoanalysis. Like, what is it in my psyche that's coming out like this? And I'll give you what I think is kind of tangentially sort of an example of this. I remember when my grandparents on my father's side passed, and I was very close to both of them and spent a lot of time growing up with them. They kind of semi-raised me for a little while, and they both died within a week of each other. It was very, very sad. I mean, they lived long, full lives, but still, when you're really close to them and they die so close to each other. And for a long time after they passed, I would have these horribly vivid dreams. And sometimes they were sweet and great memories, but sometimes you would wake up and the dreams themselves would feel almost traumatic having had the dream, but they would also feel so real about my grandparents. And like, when I say traumatic, I mean, like, I had these dreams where in the dream, it was this long extended dream, and I believed they had come back from the dead in this dream. I believe that it was all a mistake and they were actually recovering, and it felt so real. And then you wake up and you realize, oh, of course they're still dead. And it's like, it's kind of sad that my mind went through that whole thing. And that may sound like a weird analogy to bring up with the question of, what if God came 20 times and told you that you're a prophet? But the reason I bring up this example is because there was never a point, no matter how many times when I had those dreams, and some of them felt very realistic, there was never a point when I woke up and thought, Grandma's actually come back from the dead. There was never even a point when I woke up and thought, I talked to Grandma last night. I never, and I know people have different viewpoints on this. Even atheists can some of them think that, there are spirits and that you can talk to the dead, because being an atheist doesn't mean that you're a perfect empiricist, right? It's not a one-to-one Venn diagram. But for me personally, there was never a moment, no matter how many times I had those dreams, and there was never a moment, no matter how realistic they felt, that I ever thought, I actually talked to Grandma last night. So maybe that's not a direct connection to his question or to their question, but for me personally, I can't imagine the scenario where I would say, oh my gosh, after being told over and over again, I guess I'm the prophet.
I think you went an interesting direction with that question, but I think that's an interesting answer. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's acceptable to say there's really no threshold. I would think it was some hallucination. I mean, I think it depends on what you feel like you're being summoned to do, but then it gets back to your own personal preference and not really about the stimulus that you're receiving. All right, This is another, I think, interesting question that's a little bit silly, but maybe a little bit fun, and it's not something that we talked about, but I left it on the screen for a bit, and I'm giving it sort of a long introduction so that you can sort of tee this up with a thoughtful answer if you'd like. And remember, we can always come back to questions, and we can always skip over this. And by the way, we're at an hour right now, so I'll just remind the room that if you haven't clicked on Skepticus's channel, it's a really fantastic channel. I think it's a really great platform for discussion. Well, I've got so many more questions about your channel, so we're going to get to some more of those as well. But let's take another question from the audience here, and let's take the one on screen. And by the way, also just a reminder, click the like button, subscribe to my channel if you aren't already subscribed. And if you ever want to reach out, if anyone ever wants to reach out for that matter, every Monday, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, I do an open panel where people can just come on and talk to me or talk to each other. So let's take this question next, though.
Okay. So my answer, so there are two buttons. Button 1, ask God one question. Button 2, God grant you one wish. Which button are you pressing and what would each be? So, of course, the rules lawyer of me wants to say, well, but I don't believe God is there. So either what, but I'm not going to be that guy. I will engage with the question here. So
let's say maybe that there's a parallel universe where there is a God, and you can summon that God to come in and interact with our universe, and then he gets spirited.
Fair enough. So I would push the button push button 2. And I say that because to me the pursuit of knowledge is more valuable than the gift of knowledge. So I'm sure if I sat down and thought about it for long enough, I could think of things that would say, well, if someone could just tell me this, I'd like to know. But the pursuit of knowledge, like I'm fascinated by the idea that that there's other intelligent life in the universe, but I don't know if I would want the omnipotent God to tell me, yes, and here's the species and here's where they're at. Like, it's more fascinating to me to think, even though I don't think that in my lifetime I will ever get the answer, it's still more fascinating to me to think that we will, as a species, pursue that information possibly for millennia. So going to button number 2,
That's really well said, by the way. I really like your answer to that. The pursuit of knowledge is more important than the knowledge itself. I love that. That's really nice.
For button 2, here's the wish that I would ask of the God. I would like, if going forward, every single person, I wouldn't want to push a button to make religion go away. I wouldn't want to push a button to make people non-religious. I would like it if going forward, everyone, if there's some kind of construct to where everyone chose a religion, like at a certain point, like when you became 18 or something, because, and this is going to sound like me railing against religion, but it's not so much about that. Like if somebody is 25 and they've gone through a bunch of stuff in life and they said, I really sat down and did all the thinking and I've decided I'm a Christian, and I gave my life to Christ, then good for you. I mean, I mean that sincerely. I'm happy for you. But whatever religion we're talking about, not just Christianity, but religion across the world and throughout time survives mostly because of indoctrination. Now, I'm not saying that if it went away tomorrow that it wouldn't come back, because I also believe we're a long ways from a species of ever being in a place where we wouldn't keep creating new religions. But I just wish that religion, the wish I would like to have granted is that religion is not imbued upon us through indoctrination, but is somehow through some mechanism instead an active choice that people all make for themselves.
I mean, I think that's a beautiful answer. I mean, I think that's sort of like John Rawls' A Theory of Justice, if you've read that. The rules of morality should be decided from like sort of in a vacuum where you have reason, but you don't have cultural context. That's, in some ways, that's what I'm trying to approximate with my rational theistic gambler perspective in the CTF argument. All right, we've got a really lively chat a really lively conversation in the chat about, I have another question for you, but I don't know if you have any. There is a really lively chat topic on this. Impossible question: burgers or pizza? We've had a lot of responses on this in the chat. I guess what I'll suggest on this is, first of all, I can tell by the enthusiasm for the answers in the chat that we're having conversation around dinner time for some people. So I understand that. Yeah. Number two, you know, as a vegetarian, if I walk into a place and they've got they've got a burger, or they've got pizzas, I'm gonna get the burgers just because I only eat meat when it's free and freely supplied, because that way I'm not contributing to a field that's unethical. So I'm always gonna eat the burgers over the pizza personally. But anyways, you can weigh in on this. I do have another question for you, and
I will just say I would love to hear the next question, but I would say that I think that pizza is nature's perfect food, and I love burgers, but pizza is just it's brought. If there is proof of a loving God who wants us to be happy, it's pizza.
I think Chris makes a really good point that if, from a nutritional aspect, you really want pizza if you only have one thing that you can eat for the rest of your life. So it kind of depends on if the question is for one meal or for the rest of your life, if you had to choose one or the other. Yeah, you know, so I wanted to resonate with something that you said earlier, and we'll kind of backtrack just a little bit, but you had the experience of having some people who are theological, um, who weighed in on your channel without really engaging with the argumentation. Just kind of like they looked at it. You know, that's happened to me too. A lot of people like look at my videos and they put a comment in, and I'm like, did you watch the video? Because you're kind of arguing on something that has not. And then, you know, and oftentimes what I do is I take that comment and I'll put it into, ironically, a large language model, and I'll say, did a large language model write this? And it'll often, and it's a weird thing because now you need a large, I don't like using large language models, but now you need one to detect if the answer came from a large language model, essentially. So how do you think the discourse on theology has evolved in the advent? And I know you sort of entered the forum after large language models became a widespread thing, but as it's becoming more widespread, how do you think that's changing how we interact with each other, interact with theological ideas? I'm kind of interested in that topic as somebody who uses LLMs for a lot of my research interests on a daily basis. I almost every day I use large language models for, you know, specific medical applications, not for my widespread use. I don't like using them for widespread stuff, but I know that all of our discourse has really been molded by ChatGPT, by Claude, and other stuff. So, what do you think about that? How is that changing us? How is that changing the conversation? How do you think it's going to change our expression of theology over time?
Well, I have to preface this first of all by saying that as a disclaimer, of course, as a computer programmer nowadays, very quickly in the last several years, everyone in this field, our job has to some extent been invaded by LLMs and AI. So, and I'm not one of these people who's like a Luddite saying, "Oh, this is horrible. We have to get rid of the technology." I mean, there are beautiful things that LLMs do, and I use them every single day now in my job. So I everything I'm about to say, it's not me saying, "Oh, LLM's bad, AI bad." I'm not worried about the AI apocalypse, at least not yet. But that being said, I think that they're incredibly powerful. But with regard to theology, I actually feel they're kind of dangerous, and here's why. Because people have a tendency, because LLMs respond to you in a way that is or feels conversational, right? So if you are a flat earther, for example, and you go out to Google and you search flat earthers, of course you're going to find a ton of sites that tell you that the earth is flat. But you don't get this sense when you did it when you used to do a Google search. You didn't get this sense that Google was confirming your flat eartherness. Even if they brought back 100 sites that all said yes, the earth is flat, I think most people understood that Google was just this gateway that brought you to whatever was out there in the big bad world of the internet. Now, whether you're using Google's AI, fronted search synopsis at the top, or whether you're opening a full LLM like ChatGPT or Genesis or whatever, now you're getting these answers about flat Earth that don't just give you links to sites. The conversational aspect feels like it is this intelligent being confirming your suspicions already that the Earth is flat. And then it's exacerbated by the fact that LLMs are, at least all the ones I've seen, are always trained to be sycophantic to suck up to you and make you feel like whatever they understand by your questions and by your feedback what you really want to hear, and then they continue to tailor that feedback more and more. So I think that it accelerates the ability of people on any sides of an issue. Okay, and I'm not just talking about young Earth creationists. I'm not talking about fundamentalists. I'm not talking about it. Just talking about, this could be atheists too. But like when I use an LLM, I have these pre-prompts that I don't have to think about it. Like they're already configured in there, and I put this long list of prompts in there that tells it, question everything I put in. Don't ever take my suggestion verbatim. Don't tell me it was a good thing. I don't care about your opinion. I have all these suggestions or instructions that go on every query, which doesn't solve the issue, but it makes it a little less sycophantic. But I'm bringing this up because, for example, I did a video on my site reacting to the idiots at Answers in Genesis. Specifically, there's this guy, Calvin Smith, at Answers in Genesis Canada, and they have a huge following. They're getting 500,000 views on these things, and it drives me nuts. And it's not, he just does video after video of complete and blatant misinformation. They literally are paid to lie to children. It's disgusting. But specifically, he had this series where he's got ChatGPT up and he's got Grok up, and he's asking them, what are the odds that life could ever arise without a creator? And he's asked, and and I hate to say it this way, but I'm going to say it anyway, to the idiots that follow his content, he is absolutely providing massive confirmation bias to them, because it's not just their favorite liar, Calvin Smith, telling them all the things that they already wanted to hear about massive science disinformation, but now he's showing how you can put these queries into chat bots like Grok and ChatGPT, and they don't even realize half the time the way that he has seeded the chatbot, the LLM, by just asking questions in a very specific way. All they think is that, wow, ChatGPT just told everyone that evolution is a ridiculous lie. And it just snowballs on itself. And that's why I find it to be, on theological issues, I find it to be very disturbing in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're pointing out something. I know Max made a comment, and Max, I know exactly who you're talking about. And Chris had a really great question, so I do want to come back to that question from Chris earlier. We'll come back to that. I'll hopefully be able to find it. But yeah, I mean, I think one of the interesting things is I will sometimes, when I do interact with ChatGPT, I'll sometimes say, are you answering me honestly, or are you being sycophantic? And then it says, that's a great question. I'm actually being a little bit sycophantic, so let me revise my answer. And then I think that I've done a good job. But then when I say, is that revision that you're giving me just sycophancy, because you're now like trying to overcompensate in the other direction to tell me that I'm doing a good job by asking the question, so revising it because I'm skeptical and you can tell that I'm skeptical. And then if you ask that question, the AI actually is unable to tell whether or not it's being sycophantic or not. It actually doesn't know the answer to that question. It's just doing stuff, so it's not I find it interesting to interact with AI. We've definitely reached the point where it's essentially completely passed the Turing test, But
let me also tell you something that I think is another aspect of AI that is very sad or scary, which is that it really ties into religion. What is one of the things that skeptics like to maybe complain about with people that are of a religious bent? That a skeptic, and skeptics aren't always as good at this as they like to say that they are, but for someone who's really trying to be an honest skeptic, one of the most honest and powerful things that you can say to a difficult question is, I don't know. You ask me about, You ask me about a book, that I've never heard of, and I'll say, I don't know. Or you ask me about, like, well, how did life come about on Earth? I don't know. I mean, I can point you to a few places that know about the research better than I do, but I don't actually know. And I also know that as a species right now, we don't have the answer to that yet either. But just like religious people, not all religious people, but just like some religious people, unfortunately, have a deep discomfort with saying, I don't know. LLMs also, it's very difficult to get an LLM to just tell you, I don't know, or there's not sufficient information for that, or we haven't solved that yet. The LLM is programmed, or trained, we should say, because it's not programmed. It's trained in such a way to always try to exude confidence.
Yeah, I mean, I think Dr. Kurt makes a really good point. Let me see if I can find that. But the AI is in the same position as your friends are, though, right? So that's a good question, right? Like if if somebody asks me a question, can I really divorce my answer from the context? I mean, like I can try, but it's sometimes hard to do. And I think it's interesting because we've trained AI to not become like artificial super intelligence, to not do better than what we do, but to get closer to what we do. And in some ways, that's a really flawed standard, right? You have like AI emulating our speech, which is also overconfident and also confirmation bias. I'm going to talk about something a little bit different, and then I want to get to this really great question from Chris earlier. Let's see if I find it again. Shoot, I just had it. I keep going back to like the newer. Chris, if you want to put your comment back in the chat again, you had a comment earlier that I really liked. So we'll come back to that. But I wrote a book about the fact that we're at a time where, for the first time, the how type questions about the universe and the why type questions are being disarticulated from each other, right? So I feel like the apologetic perspective is always like, you need God to answer those how type questions. God is a mechanism, and so anytime you find a gap, you're making space for God in that gap. And in some ways, it's a noble pursuit, but it kind of, here's the problem with it ultimately. God is always, if there is a God, smarter than we are, right? So there's never going to be a point, unless we become much more intelligent or God becomes much more dumb, there's never going to be a point at which we are encountering the footprints of God, and we see the mechanisms that only God could have done, right? Because if it does get to that point, then we essentially have a smoking gun for God. So as long as God is smarter than us, God's going to be able to be two steps ahead of us, and as long as we're living in a universe where there's at least some degree of divine hiddenness. So I feel like the better move is to say, we don't need religion to answer the how type questions of the universe. That should be, and always hopefully will be, although there's some people argue that there's an event horizon for scientific understanding, that our scientific knowledge won't expand indefinitely. But we should always answer those how type questions, those mechanistic, those causal questions through the lens of the sciences. And religion should be the domain of the why type questions, the greater questions about purposefulness, the greater questions about why are we here, the greater questions about how to nourish our souls. Those should always be theological questions. We should also always parse that out separately from the why, the how type questions. All right. So okay. All right. So here was, I think, Chris's question. I'm actually curious. Were you discontent with religion itself and its values because of bad actors or NPC-ish characters who only recite scripture instead of personalized situational talking and conversation? So let me put those back on the screen again. Hopefully you're seeing them in the chat on StreamYard too.
Yeah.
And just a reminder, we're now at an hour and 15 minutes. I'll probably let it go about 2 hours. So we've got plenty of time for more questions. I've got more questions that I wanted to ask. I would encourage you all to put your questions in the chat, because there aren't that many settings where you get like this, where there's, you got a theist and an atheist in the same room who are being quite, agreeable with each other, who I think we both have a lot of common ground, frankly.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. So feel free to ask anything you want. And don't forget to go back to to Skepticus' channel, check out some of his content. It's really fantastic. Make sure you subscribe to his channel. click the like button on this channel if you haven't already. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. All right, and now go ahead and answer this question from Chris.
So with regard to like the religion itself, the values versus bad actors or NPC-ish who recite scripture, uh, most of my frustrations with the bad actors really only just got much stronger after I'd already left the religion. So when I was in the religion, um, here's the deal. When I was a Christian, I didn't have a problem with the values of Christianity, with a big, fat, nasty asterisk on that. Because, like almost every other Christian that I've ever known in my life, the values that I associated with Christianity were mostly values that I had made up or decided in my own mind were Christian values, or were told to me by other people I trusted in the religion, but they weren't. They were a construct. Meaning, if you ask somebody today, just a big thought experiment, pull 100 or 10 Christians off the street or whatever, and you say, "What are Christian? Tell me what are Christian values? What does that phrase even mean?" Of course, some of them will give you. There are some answers you'll get between all of them. Some of them will give you answers that none of them will repeat, okay? Because some of them will have different answers. But even for the ones that they say this is a Christian value, most of them, if you go back then and try to find evidence for it in the scriptures, it's either is it there or it's contradictory. It's I believe we should love our neighbor. Okay, I mean I agree with that too. There's plenty in the Bible that contradicts that. There's plenty in the day-to-day operations of the church that openly contradict that. And also, by the way, that's not a Christian value. Like the golden rule was around before Christianity. They don't have a patent on that. There's plenty of other religions that also believe that you should love your neighbor and don't be a dick. Like this is not the sole domain of Christianity. So the more you get into trying to triangulate around what you think Christian values are, and I'm not saying, don't take this the wrong way, I'm not saying that Christians don't have values, and I'm not saying that they don't have any good values, but I'm saying that what Christians typically give you as supposedly being Christian values are usually more of a construct. So like I see Slave of Adonai putting these up. So, cheating on your spouse. I mean, I do agree that generally speaking, Christians say you should not cheat on your spouse. I will also tell you that where it tracks to in the scriptures is more about property and treating people as property. Now, you could say, regardless of what it says in the scriptures, maybe our church believes you shouldn't cheat on your spouse. I would agree with you, okay? But I'm saying that if we go back and track this in the scriptures, a lot of it comes down to much nastier ideas of how people interact. When we say, "Oh, don't murder," that's what I love to point out. Don't murder and don't steal. Well, again, those aren't germane to Christianity. There are plenty of other religions that think you shouldn't murder and shouldn't steal, but also saying you can't murder and you can't steal, both of those are tautologies, because murdering is by definition an unjust killing. So even every atheist believes that murder is wrong, whether they'll admit it or not. Every person in every other religion believes that murder is wrong, because by definition, murder is an unjust killing. Now, well, what makes an unjust killing versus a just killing? Oh, now we are deep into subjective territory that every society throughout time has had little disagreements about what is or is not just. What makes, stealing is also a tautology, because it's an unjust taking. What makes it unjust? Well, now we're back into subjective territory that every society throughout time has had disagreements about what is or is not an unjust taking. So anyway, I went off on a tangent there, but I'm talking about, trying to figure. So when I was a Christian, I didn't have a problem with what I believed to be Christian values. But if I'm being really frank with you, the set of values that I had that were Christian values, and they were good values, but then I realized these aren't really Christian values. These are just, don't be an asshole, don't be a jerk, treat people well. And to be frank with you, now, I've realized now that most of my values can clearly be ascribed to secular humanism. I mean, when I left, when I finally realized that I was an atheist, I really didn't. I'd heard of secular humanism before, but I hadn't really spent any time looking into it. And then you have one of those moments where later you go like, oh, I guess I'm a secular humanist because I believe all this. To me, that is my moral framework.
Well, I'm going through some interesting questions in the chat. I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to One Day. I keep calling you One Day Three, but it's On Day Three or OD3. Really fantastic channel. I think he's got a stream that I'm going to check out later this evening, which is his stream with some Christians and some atheists. So, folks, if you don't know each other, please check that out. And on Day Three, if you don't already know them, please check out Slave of Adonai and Voyage Apologetics. Really great channels. Dr. Kurt's Substack is really great, and he's interacted with a lot of my arguments. Um, uh, all right, and there's some great comments in the chat. And now let me turn it back over to you, Adam. I sent you a list of questions. We're about maybe 2/3 of the way through. Some of the, I think we're about actually less than that, probably about 40%. I think we're about 40%. What's a question that I put to you in the email where I said let's have a conversation that we haven't got to, that you would like us to get to and you'd like to answer? I've got a bunch more that I want to get to as well too. And also, if you're in the chat, if you're watching, while I give Adam a second to answer that question, please don't forget to check out each other's channels. Check out Adam's channel. Skepticus is Adam's channel, and it's really fantastic. If you look, skepticus.channel is your YouTube channel, and people should definitely check it out. And while I'm doing this, I'm realizing that I'm setting up people to, while you're thinking about that too, Adam, I'm really setting up people to have echo chambers, right? I'm like, hey, Christians, get to know each other. Hey, other atheists, get to know each other. So I guess that's my next question. We are living in a world where I feel like theology is at fault for the world turning into highly fractionalized echo chambers, right? So we maybe have the biggest responsibility on our backs for breaking that. So how do you do that? How do you break the world from being echo chambers? You talked about, I think you engage with a lot of atheists, but you made the point that 90% of your channel are people who already agree with what you're saying. And that's what we like. We like to be told that we're right. We don't like to be told here's a new viewpoint. So how do you undo that? What do you do to reach out to the other side of the aisle? What do you do to keep the conversation refreshed, to keep the world from turning into increasingly marginalized, fractionated, segmented echo chambers? And are we losing that battle? And is it a battle that we can't win?
So first of all, I think that the worry about echo chambers is a real concern, but it will sound like I'm lawyering that question, but there's two ways to look at this, and I think that they're both realistic. So one, I think it's reasonable to understand that on my best day, when I think I'm just spitting truth, like I think that I'm making the best points ever, and man, this video was so well researched and I did all the best things. The fact is, most people are tuning in because it's a form of entertainment. And some people get entertained by watching the latest Marvel movie. Some people get entertained by watching, a long form series on Netflix. Some people get entertained by going on the net or going and watching apologist videos if they're believers, or watching atheist videos if they're non-believers. And I bring this up just to say that there's nothing wrong with being a Christian and wanting to tune in one night and watch a popular apologist kind of just make you feel good with all of the stuff you already knew about Christianity, right? There's nothing wrong with being an atheist and tuning into some guy's atheist show and watching it for an hour, even if he doesn't tell you a single new thing that you wanted to know, because to some extent, it's just entertainment, bro. That being said, I'm not saying it to say that there's no problem with echo chambers. I'm just saying that sometimes when we do content that's not scripted content, like when we think we're doing research content and we think we're doing, like sometimes as content creators, we get inside our head like, oh, I need to be teaching the world about atheism. I need to be teaching people about all these problems in Christianity. And the fact is, a lot of people that are tuning into my stuff, they already know my viewpoint and they agree with it. And quite frankly, that's okay. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. I think where it becomes dangerous and where we need to think more about trying to break out of the echo chamber is when we do have situations where we are thrust into or reaching out to people across the aisle, because I do think that too many times you have someone who's not a believer, doesn't believe the same things that you do. And what does YouTube normally want to do with that? Let's have a debate. Debate me, bro. Come on, let's. And the, every time, not every time, but nearly every time that I've seen these debates, whether it's TikTok or YouTube or whatever, I find them to almost always be vacuous and pointless. You don't change anyone's viewpoint. If anything, everyone on either side just gets more entrenched after watching the debate. So to me, I'm not trying to fluff us up here, pat ourselves on the back, but to me, the only way that you break out of that is to grow the hell up and put down the debate me bro mindset. I mean, not that you and I, we've already said it's not like you and I are at odds, but even if we were, even if I could provide some sick burn tonight, to, your stupid CTF, idea or something, like all that's going to do is it's going to piss off the people that like you. It's going to, and then you might say something back to me, which will then piss off the people that like me, and you get nowhere with it. So if you're not, let me wrap this up and say that if you're preaching to the choir to a certain extent for entertainment purposes only, that's fine. But if you are actually going to try to engage with other people, stop the debate me bro crap and have a conversation. It still doesn't mean that somebody can't take your stuff out of context. I mean, even on a show that is as even keeled as our conversation tonight, is it possible that somebody could watch this and think, "Oh, Tavo really roasted me," or "I really roasted him"? I guess it's possible.
Yeah, I'm gonna edit it, and I'm gonna use a lot of AI to show that So when you're like, I guess you're right. When I'll cut that up, and then yes, so that yeah.
I totally agree, but like I think if you're gonna break out of the echo chamber, I think the only chance you have of doing that is to have real conversations and not confrontations.
Well, I think there's two things that we're working against. One is, our desire to seek out confirmational sources. So that's a really powerful thing that we're working against. The other powerful thing is, we dress up our beliefs with reason, but almost always, and this is true for atheists and religious people alike in studies that they've done, almost always the reasoning is post hoc.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's hard. I will tell you, in this channel, I've changed my mind a couple of times. There have been a few arguments that I've interacted with where I've been like, I think that's right. And all right. So what we'll go to a question that I sent you in my email that we haven't asked yet that you'd like me to ask. But before we do that, and while you're finding a question, there's a lot of love for the beard. There's a lot of love for the beard. Let's see. Yours, yes, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
There's is it weird that I envy his beard? He just looks wise. Man, the beard, bruh. And then it got a little weird after that. It did get a little bit weird. Can you do a beard stroke like your best thinking face? There we go. Okay. That's what I'm talking about. No, it's getting weird. It's getting weird. All right. No, don't worry. We do have just for the viewers who are out there, we do have a calendar that we're working on. So the men of talking with Tavo, and we'll get into that. All right, good.
It.
So yeah, all right. So now so what our reason is and can only be properly be the slave of the passions. That's a quote from David Hume. Some appreciating that I had you do the beard stroke. All right. So what's a question that I sent you that I haven't asked, or what's a question that you'd like me to ask? What's a question that you wish somebody from the theistic side of the spectrum would ask? What are questions that you wish a Christian would ask you, or or a question from the email that we haven't gotten to yet?
So here's the one I'm going to pull out because I get this all the time, but at the risk of sounding self-promotional, I'm actually about to record a few videos that talk specifically to this point. So it's right at the. I'm not saying this because I'm trying to promote a video I haven't even.
No,
made
no,
yet.
we're having you on here to grow our communities together in part. So yeah, if you want to
Yeah.
promote, feel free. This is
Well,
definitely like
it's
you can,
stuff
yeah,
is right here in my mind now, and it feels
sure.
like, especially over the last 6 months, especially or the last 3 months, even more and more of my mental channel cycles have been spinning around these morality questions because I can sit there with believers and we can I can kind of say like, hey, the resurrection didn't happen or something, like we can kind of have that little sword fight or something, or we can I can talk about biblical contradictions, and those, that's fun sometimes, although sometimes it also becomes kind of banal. But what I find to be more harmful, not just to me personally, like my heart, but I mean, what's more harmful in discussions between believers and non-believers is the moral question. And I found, in my perception, I think this is just because of the tunnels that I'm going down. I feel like I'm seeing more and more stuff from people explicitly on the believer side who want to bang this drum that somehow, if you're not a believer, specifically if you're an atheist, that you have to be immoral or amoral. So you probably know where I'm going with this, because the question you had sent me, you said, how do you ground moral claims without a transcendent foundation? I know that's a classic question and you probably get it every other week, but I'm curious how you'd put it in your own voice rather than the textbook version. So because it is at front of mind already, let me tell you how I explain this. I mean, there are a couple different ways to explain it, of course, but there are a couple key ways. First of all, every transcendent, especially as it applies to morality, is usually used as a analog of objective. So objective, transcendent, those two words don't mean exactly the same thing, but usually they're used interchangeably. And anytime a believer wants to talk to me about their transcendent values from God or their objective morality from God, I can take it a couple different ways. First of all, I can say, please show me this subjective morality, because I literally have not been able to find it anywhere. Every single time they show me something that they think is an objective standard of morality, every single time it's subjective. There are a few places, like in the Hebrew Bible, where there were pretty objective things given to you, like don't eat shellfish. Those have all been tossed out. All the things that could maybe possibly, apply as being objective, they toss those out, right? But so that's one way, is to just argue from examples, like, okay, show me this objective stuff. But I think that there's much more meaningful ways to look at this besides just kind of pointing back to them and saying, well, I don't see your objective stuff, so why are you asking me about mine? So the human brain, of course, does many, many things, but one of the primary functions over millions of years that the human brain has evolved, and the brain of most species for that matter, has evolved to be, is an analog difference engine. What that means in quick layman's terms is just that if I asked you down to the gram, or the ounce or whatever, how much does this jar weigh, you would have a really hard time just estimating how much it weighs in kilograms or in ounces or whatever, because even if you worked with jars like this all day long, the human brain is not made to try to think of exactly how many grams is this. Okay, that's not the way that we think. But if instead I had, it's a bad example because I don't have two of these jars, but if I just had these two objects and I said, which one is closer, which one is farther, you don't have to think about that. You may not know what the actual digital distance is between the two, but you know which one's getting closer and you know which one's getting farther. You know if the lion is farther or closer. You know if the roar that you heard in the jungle is louder or fainter. You know if the jar of water that you've been given is full or empty or somewhere in the middle. What the hell does that have to do with morality or transcendent values? Well, I don't have to have a transcendent value for anything to understand relative values. I don't have to know what is the farthest possible thing in the universe to know that this credit card is not as far away as this credit card? Do I know what the farthest value in the universe is? Of course I don't. And that doesn't matter because
nobody freeze frame on this and look at his credit card numbers. You sure they're not visible, right?
No, they're not. They're not.
Okay, I just want to make sure. Okay.
But you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
which one of my fingers is closer? Like, I don't need to know what the closest possible finger is. When keeping with our theme of pizza, and this is actually in a script that I was writing, I don't have to know what the best possible pizza is in order to understand that the piece of pizza I'm eating now is really great or it's a really crappy piece of pizza. Even if God has never communicated to me what the best possible pizza is, I can intuitively understand that this pizza is junk and this pizza is dang good. And I bring this up because there is this persistent, intellectually lazy shorthand myth that I've found many apologists just love to reach for, which is that, if you don't have an objective moral standard, or if you don't have a transcendent, measure of God, then you can't actually have any morals or any measurements at all. And that is just so patently false. I can tell, because I have empathy, when someone around me is suffering a lot, and I can tell when they're suffering a little and then when they're suffering not at all. I mean, you can't tell exactly, of course, because I'm not in their brain, but you can tell. You can tell when people are unnecessarily being harmed, and you can tell when they are not being harmed. And I don't need to have a magic God figure to tell me what the ultimate harm is or what the ultimate good is, to know that maybe today Tavo's really damn depressed and he's sad and he's crying, and then 2 weeks from now he's really happy and he's obviously in a better place. Like, I don't have to have God to make that basic human observation. And the last thing I'll say on this with regard to transcendent standards is that every single theists, whether they know it or want to admit it or not, already know exactly how subjective standards and subjective morality works. Because even if you don't want to admit that your morality is subjective, we all live in a perfect example of subjective values. It's called the law. No matter where you live, no matter what municipality or jurisdiction you live in, there is some kind of law there. And every one of those laws, every single one of them, is subjective. Every one of those laws has changed over time. And every one of those laws changed from one society to the next. Sometimes they change from one city to the next. Now, we can argue about whether those changes are good. We can say, well, the laws in that city I don't like them. They're kind of janky. But you can't logically say, well, because they don't have an objective standard for the perfect way to write this law, that means that that city has no laws. That is logically incoherent. That's
I understand what you're saying. It's interesting because I would go in the opposite direction. I would argue that you don't have. Well, let's do this question from Slave Now and I, and then I'll come to it because I think I have some insight on this. And then after we do this question, I want to open it up a little bit more to you because we've got about 15 minutes left. I want you to have a chance to ask me whatever questions you'd like to ask. But let's tackle this question. It's kind of on a similar line, but he did ask it previously, so I want to get to it. But I think it's a good question as well. Oh, did you see it? Could he define evil? That's the question.
I see that. So I believe that evil exists, and I can define evil. But I will also freely admit to you that the definition that I'm going to give you it's my own subjective definition for evil, and it's not a definition that any religious person would normally define as evil. It won't shock you to find out that I don't believe that there's anyone with a pitchfork, and I don't believe that evil comes from God or Satan or anything like that. But even though I am mostly essentially a nihilist in terms of I don't believe we have inherent purpose imprinted into us, if there is any purpose that we can pretty much imply just from our existence, it is that we wouldn't even be here as a species if we weren't propagating ourselves, which hopefully we're not propagating ourselves in misery. So propagating ourselves not just by recreating or procreating, but by also, giving us longer lifespans, increasing our well-being in the world, decreasing our harm, etc. So to me, even though I don't think that this is a God-given value, I think that if there's any group purpose that we have in life, it's to make humanity better, to further humanity. I mean, that could be as simple as just having kids. You can say, look, I furthered my genes, but I don't mean it just in that basic sense. I mean, new scientific discoveries, finding ways to live longer and happier, finding ways to reduce war, finding ways to reduce disease. All of that is the closest thing that I can come to an innate purpose in our life. So why do I bring this up with regard to evil? I believe that those things which counter that ability for us to further ourselves as a species, I would define as evil. So evil could be you just kill a bunch of people, because that obviously goes against our ability to flourish as a species, right? But evil to me is also people who willfully lie about scientific evidence to back their religious claims, people who willfully shut their eyes to truth, people who teach those lies to their children, people who would use their religion or any other reason to oppress the LGBT community, or people that would use their religion or any other reason to oppress people on the basis of race, people that would, foster misogyny. To me, those things are evil. Now, a lot of atheists would not agree with that. A lot of atheists would just say there is no evil. Evil is just a fantasy word by Christians or whatever, by religious people. But that is my definition of evil.
I mean, that's powerful and persuasive, if nothing else. I don't know that I agree with all that stuff, but I've got a real hard time with defining objective morality as well. I think, I could define it with God, and I could say, well, it's defined by God, but then I'm just sort of kicking the can up one level. And I sort of admit that. As if you had me in a room and you said define ethics, I would probably come out an ethical emotivist, essentially. And that's kind of where I land in general. All right, well, we got about 15 minutes left. So what are some questions you want to ask me? You can ask questions to me, you can ask questions to the audience, anything, and we can just kind of keep it free form for these last 15 minutes or so.
Well, I did want to ask, like we touched on the CTF stuff before, and I gave you my opinion of it, but I was also injecting my own interpretation there. I watched several of your videos on this, but I guess I'm wondering, aside from doing the analysis, which I respect, what is it that you're trying to get to with CTF? What is your overlying goal in that?
It started off as just a research project, and I was trying to just sort of answer questions. And I don't really have an agenda, but I think in some ways that puts me in a good position to answer the question. I'm theologically non-committed. My views are rather syncretic. And, you may know this about me already, but I was diagnosed with terminal leukemia some years ago, and I was going to die. And I was an atheist at the time, and very close to death. And they said, we either start dialysis or you're going to die. And I said, it's time for me to just go home and be put on comfort care. And my kidneys shut down, and that was it, And at no point did I feel uncomfortable with my atheism. I was uncomfortable for sure, but physically, and I was like, well, if this is it, this is it. Nothing's going to change it, but I'm looking forward to it being over. And I'll tell you one other thing, which is totally a non sequitur, but a very fascinating lesson that I learned from that is you can take 100 people and tell them you're going to die in a month and say, make peace with that. And if you come back to them at the end of the month, about 98% of them will say, I'm at peace. I realize that, this is my time. If that's it, and that's it, I'm at peace with that. If you take 100 people and you say you're going to live 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and you come back to them at some point in the midway point, and you say, are you at peace? Are you content with the way you're living your life? How many people would say yes? I think the answer is probably about maybe 20%, maybe 30%. but certainly much lower. And the most illuminating thing that I learned from that journey, the thing that I really learned, is I was disappointed. When they said you're going to live now, I was like, I kind of there. I wasn't totally disappointed. Like I'm not pathologically depressed or anything, but there was that kind of sense of like, well, all right, I'm kind of anticlimactic now. What do I do with my life? And so I started reading in part for that reason, but in part just out of my own curiosity. I started reading the Kitab-i Aqdas of Baha'i. I think it's a beautiful book. Um, and I read the Guru Granth Sahib of Sikhism, also a very beautiful book. And I read a lot of other theological works. So I don't know but that brought me to a perspective where, philosophically at least, my views are very syncretic. You talked about your admiration for Buddhism. Buddhism has had a fascinating journey throughout history. In the last 5 centuries or so, and certainly since the modern age, there's been what's called sort of a philosophical laundering, meaning that the theological and theistic aspects of Buddhism have really been downplayed. And what we've been left behind with is, especially in the West, is this sort of Buddhist philosophy
I
rather
agree with
than a Buddhist
yeah.
theology. Yeah. So it really was a religion at one point. It's sort of been, those religious facets of it have been sort of washed away. And I'd made an interesting script for a video that I've never put up, which is about religious fragility, how a lot of theologies have turned from theology into philosophy, in a sense, exhibiting fragility. Secular pressures have mounted, and most of those religions have said, okay, like Confucianism is a great example. It used to be a religion, now it's purely a philosophy. Buddhism, less so. There are still some people who adhere to Buddhism as a religion. And Christianity happens to be one of the religions that really goes in the opposite direction. So as Christianity has encountered secularism, Christianity has become more fundamentalist, more reactionary, more even right wing in some ways. So I find that to be an interesting thing. I don't know if that points towards truth or points in any particular direction in my truth search, but that's just where I got with that question. So you're asking about my agenda. I don't think that I have one in particular. I love many religions. I love many theological traditions. Jainism, somebody's commenting, Jainism seems pretty chill. Jainism is a lovely religion. I actually think Jainism really complements Christianity. That's
It's
something that
it's
got.
lovely. It's also pacifist to the point of extremism, and like I've become more and more pacifist as I've gotten older. But man, Jainism like really tests your commitment to pacifism.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in some ways, that's what I like about it. I think Jainism is the perfect religion if there were never any moral transgressions. In other
Mm,
words, if Jainism were easy, I think everyone would be Jain. I think that's the best religion by far. The issue is, if you're going to live in this world and you're going to do harm, which we're going to do, how do you reconcile that with the world? How do you get forgiveness? I think that's a real challenge for Jainism. But in and of itself, the people who are living the life of Jainism, which are essentially just the very ascetic monks, are really very admirable. I think it's a beautiful religion. Michael Cole says, "Great talk tonight. Really like that you enjoyed it." Do you have any other questions for me, Adam, that you want to ask? I mean, I kind of answered that question. You were saying, what's the purpose of CTF? What's the agenda? I don't really have one. I just thought it was an interesting observation that there is evidence for every theology. There's evidence for every theological claim, and we can actually weigh that evidence through an academic historiographical lens. I just think that's sort of an interesting exercise.
it is fair. I think we're on a cool plane here. I don't think I had to apologize for myself. But when I said I think you're missing the point, I don't. I was inferring my own point in it, and then I was thinking, but that misses the point. Because when I was a Christian, and this, it still happens all the time today. I'm sure you've encountered this before. There's so many people who get hung up in this isn't what CTF is doing, but there's so many people get hung up in whatever the latest apologist slash quasi archaeologist find is out of the Levant. They want to say, look, we found a pottery shard that has the letter Y on it, which has to be Yeshua, which has to mean that Jesus, lived. And I would always think to myself, even if that's true, you're missing the damn point. Because if the only reason that you're a Christian is because I just found it to have the best corpus of evidence, physical, empirical evidence, I would say, so? So we proved that Jesus lived. So now some of this, a lot of the more miracle stuff you'll never prove or disprove. It's an article of faith. But I guess that's what I'm trying to get to, is that, to me, if religion has value, it's in being able to embrace something as an article of faith and not as an empirical case. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Like the CTF argument looks at historiographical evidence by its nature, right? But I would absolutely agree that that's not the only lens that you need. I think a moralistic lens is sometimes more appropriate. I think a subjective lens is even more appropriate, right? There are people who come to me who testify for many different religions, who say, "I know God. I've talked to God. I've interacted with God. This is the right religion." And for them, the CTF holds no sway. In some ways, I think it's an intellectually interesting argument, but I guess the reason why I like it is because, early on, when I actually like a lot of the teachings of Jesus. I think like a lot of the teachings are like, look, God loves you, you know, love the Lord your God with all your heart and love each other. And it's this, and Jesus was really a distiller, right? And rather than moral legislation, we have essentially principled aphorisms that you can extrapolate and expropriate really in a lot of different ways. But I found that when I was having the conversation with people on the other side of the theological spectrum, you're never going to get them to agree with that. Like, right, they'll either say, well, that's too simplistic, so it's not interesting, or that comes from, so I just felt like, what objectively would I choose if I were purely just being an objective thinker? So I think that's an interesting question to ask, but it's definitely not the only question. I think subjective analysis is important. I think following your preferences is important. I think looking at what your cultural values are is very important for many, many people. And I don't think any of those are improper things to decide which religion to follow. I just think CTF is sort of is. But I will say this: if you said which do you think you have a better chance of winning, um, mere theism versus atheism. So, in other words, arguing for God without any academic historiographical evidence, or arguing for Christianity versus atheism, even though it's more narrow, I would take the second one, because I think with just theism, the arguments are, and I've said this before in some other discussions, but I'm about. I think there's three questions that I ask: is the universe purposeful, or is it just a brute fact? Right now, I made a whole video about that. I'm about 65% sure that there's some sort of purposefulness of the universe. Right. Question number two: is there a God? I'm about 50 to 55% sure that there's a God. So not as certain as my certainty that the universe is purposeful. Is Christianity true if any religion is true? So in other words, if there is a true religion, is it Christianity? There, my certainty actually goes way up. It's probably around 85%. In each instance, I have a sort of epistemic humility and calibrated uncertainty, but I think they're all three interesting questions. I think answering them together is interesting. Answering them separately is interesting. But anyways, that's a lot of words by me. And there's another question here, but yeah, I'm probably won't put questions on the screen if they have profanity. It's just, I don't know if it matters to YouTube, but some people say don't do that. So I kind of err on that side.
For
But
what it's worth, on the live streams, especially, and even on the recorded videos, there's only like a certain trigger, or after a certain amount, where it will ping your channel. But I'm not saying that, selling you for it. You have to have a standard and a personality for your own channel. So even though I know, I can tell you definitively that putting an F word on screen, or even saying it here or there, is not going to hurt your channel, like in terms of monetization or promotion or anything like that. But I'm not saying that as a way of telling you, hey, just give up and let it flow, dude. I'm like, you still have it's your channel. You got to do what you feel right with.
yeah, well, if you're giving me that permission, if you're giving me that license, then fart. Okay, there we go. I've got the profanity out of my system now, and I appreciate that. No, music by Brian. I do appreciate your coming by. We're at 2 hours, so I'll probably start winding it down. But Adam, you've hinted at some great content that you have coming out, so I'm personally really curious to see it. What are do you want to give us some more hints, or do you and feel free to be self-promotional.
Well, sure. So there's three things that I
Max
mean,
says, Adam, King of YouTube, gave you permission.
yeah,
Thank you. You're the king of YouTube, Adam. You've won YouTube.
exactly. Which is kind of funny because I was just having this conversation in one of my videos recently where I was I was in God-free Bible study where we were talking about king of, or I'm sorry, not, it was the last live stream where we were talking about Jesus as king. And it's like, okay, I'm not trying to piss off all the Christians, but Jesus is only a king if we can name anyone a king. And I even said, like, okay, I'm the king of YouTube, and and uh, Tavo, you're the king of Spain today because I said so. Like if that's how we're treating king, then yes, Jesus is king. But if I'm not trying to go down that rabbit hole of was Jesus a king or is he a king? That gets into all kinds of stuff. But since that was brought up on screen, I thought I would share that with you. But in terms of like the three things that I have coming up, and they're all kind of related, but the first one is about the transcendental piece, and this is the one I was talking about where I wrote a whole thing about I don't need an absolute standard of what is moral according to a universal thinker to know that something is moral or less moral. I don't need an absolute standard of good to know if that other thing is bad. Like, these are relative terms. These are subjective terms. The term good or bad is subjective. I don't need an objective standard of what the ultimate good is to know what that for me, this is good and this is not as good, and I can call the not as good bad if it's all subjective. So that's one script. I don't even have a title for it next yet. Another one gets more specifically into objective morality, and it dives into the example I talked about with law, because every time that I talk with theists who feel like they have this gotcha moment where they say, oh, you couldn't have morals unless you have objective morals. I'm like, okay, that's like saying you can't have laws unless you have objective laws. I mean, I could be talked off that ledge, I guess, but I've never heard a good argument against that yet. So that's another one. And then the third one, it may be a little esoteric, but and I don't know if you or any of your viewers will know about this, but this one is actually the most fun one to me, because it talks about the experience I've had since I've realized that I'm not a Christian anymore. And it uses this example. This is a bit of an arcane reference, but there was a book that came out in 1975 by Robert Shea and Robert Anton Wilson called the Illuminatus Trilogy. And it's like this weird acid trip of a book. I read it like when I was 17 in like 1990. And I didn't know what to do with it. It's like this really weird trip, and it's like acid trip and all this. But anyway, there's an incredible point in the book that I keep always coming back to with regard to faith and religion now, that they have this concept in the book where people, like all of society, has been brainwashed from the time they were very young in the schools. Every time they saw content that it's a very conspiratorial book. Okay, so every time they saw content that the big powers didn't wanted you to be uncomfortable with, they would stick this word all over the content. It's called fnord, F-N-O-R-D. The word fnord is not a word. It means nothing. That the point is it's a nonsense word. But they were trained subconsciously to always feel uncomfortable when they would see the word fnord. And the word fnord would be in like news reports of war and stock market and such. But in advertisements, there were no fnords, because you feel comfortable, you feel safe around advertisements, and around commercialism, there's no fnords. And there's this famous in small little groups, scene in the book where one person realizes, they get turned on to this. They realize what's happened to them. And then once they see the fnords, they're everywhere. like once they realize, and this is what, another analogy that people might know a little better is the they live analogy from that movie. But, once you see the Fenorids, you can't unsee them. And that is how I feel now about Christianity and the Bible. Now, less so about religion, but just like when I read the Bible now, it's like the whole damn thing is full of Fenorids. It's like, how did I miss this sentence before? And how did I miss this passage before? And how did I miss this reference? Like, oh my gosh, it's everywhere. I can't stop seeing the Fenorids. And then even getting out of it, because I know some Christians aren't as lawyerly as to dive into the Bible all the time. Some of them are more about the theological just ideals. But even when you think about the theological ideals, I'll give you a perfect example of this. I was told my entire life that Jesus died for our sins. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever shall believe in him shall not perish but have everlasting life, right? It never occurred to me to ask, why? Why does the omnipotent creator God of the universe, why can't he just forgive you? Why does he require blood or a sacrifice at all? Why can't he? And I'm not saying this to go down a path of trying to convince any of your viewers or anything, because this isn't like my live stream where I'm trying to like talk people off a ledge or something. But every time someone tells me the reasons why they think that Jesus had to live and had to be sacrificed for us, I'm like, how could Yahweh not have done that without Jesus? It's kind of like the Euthyphro dilemma. It's like either Yahweh had to go down this path, which basically means that Yahweh's not omnipotent, or he didn't actually have to do the whole Jesus thing, which makes you wonder if Jesus was really the Son of God. Now, to be clear, I'm not trying to be a dick. Like, I think that Jesus had some great teachings. Even as an atheist now, I can tell you, yes, there's a lot to love in the Sermon on the Mount and Jesus's teachings and all that. So I'm not trying to sit there and be a jerk and just say, oh, there was, Jesus was a complete stupid idiot and we never should have had him on this earth. Like, that's not my point. But my point is, when we follow the theological line that we're given from every day one when we're in Bible school as a kid, no one ever actually explains why any of this is necessary. I mean, they'll try to, like a lot of.
We're probably gonna try and wrap it up in the next couple of minutes. But yeah. But I don't want to cut you off. But yeah.
No, that's fine. I went off on a tangent there, but I'm just trying to explain in general, in too long of terms, about how there are certain questions and certain things about the religion and the Bible and all the theology, etc. Like, how did I never see this before? Like, how was I part of this for 40 years? And some of these questions just never even came to my mind.
Well, maybe that's a good topic for a part 2 of this conversation. And if you ever wanted to do that, I think this has been a fun conversation, and I'd love to have you back here anytime. I just want to make sure that everyone in the chat has a chance to go over to your channel, skepticus.channel on YouTube. It's really fantastic. People should definitely check it out. Definitely check out the content. And if you haven't already checked out my channel, please check it out. Click the like button on this video. Subscribe to my channel. I know a couple of you have already done that since we've been chatting, and I really do very much appreciate that. So please keep the love coming. Hopefully, we'll have more collaborations. If you want to do something nice for both of us, please share this video. And I think if this video does well, that will help us both to collaborate more with each other. I've got a whole bunch of stuff coming out. I'm going to be talking with Brooklyn Lou, having kind of interestingly a similar style conversation, but he's going to be really sort of challenging me on some indictments of Christianity, and I'm going to have to sort of refute those indictments. So we're looking forward to that. Dr. Kurt is a really great thinker who has some great arguments on the CTF argument and on purposefulness for the universe. So we're going to have an interaction at some point on Mega Bloodbath Debates, which is a really fantastic channel as well. Well, this has been a really fun conversation. If you don't know my channel already, just again, what I usually try to do is tackle theological questions from an academic lens. And I would encourage you to sort of like check out some of my content. And every video that I put out is hopefully the start of a conversation rather than the ending of one. So, feel free to check out my content, check out the videos, put your comment on there. And also, I live stream every Monday, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So people should definitely be encouraged to check that out. You live stream every Tuesday at 5 p.m., but what time zone?
5 p.m. Central.
Central. Okay. All right. So yeah. So Tuesdays, check out Adam on Skepticus. Really fantastic channel. Mondays, check me out. I'm always live streaming every Monday, and I've got a whole bunch of content coming out soon. So I hope that you've been challenged to at least think a little bit differently in this video, and I hope that you all will stick around and check out more content and check out both of our channels. And please consider supporting both of us. Thanks so much to lots of you who have asked really insightful, really wonderful questions. I think you've made the conversation so much better by your contributions. And I'm really grateful as I scroll through the list of names who are on the channel who have been on the chat. I'm really grateful to each and every one of you. All right. Well, thanks very much to everybody. I'm going to close off I'm going to click end screen. And Michael Cole says part 2. Hopefully that'll happen too. All right. Good night, everybody. And I hope that you all have a really wonderful night.